Katie. Cowboy. Thanks, staff. Looking forward to this conversation, so hand it over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So this briefing is to update you on where we are at with the policy work on pets with public transport. We'll also giving you a heads up on the steps that we are taking in preparation for the potential policy change to make any changes happen. Steph will run you through all of this today, but just to briefly recap on the process, as per the Council direction, this piece of work is in scope of the Regional Public Transport Plan, so the decisions that you make will ultimately be part of those decisions, which I believe will be in July. Just to be really clear, we have provided a bit of detail here, quite a bit, but we are in no way looking to preempt your decisions on the policy. We are sharing the information for the scenario that you do endorse a change in policy. The reasons for doing this now is because all the work to date has shown there is significant complexity and risk in making this change. So we want to get the change management right. So that's why we're doing some initial work for your awareness. We also want to avoid a situation where if you make a change in policy, there's a large lag to when we can make any changes. So we are trying to be ahead of the game. So now I'll pass on to Steph, who will give you the full update. And of course, we're here for questions or comments after that. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we will just go through the background a little bit and recap what we learned through the early stakeholder engagement. It's been a while since we came to Council, and I think the last time we came was July of 2024, so we'll just run through that again. And then jump into details of what we heard from the Regional Public Transport Plan consultation, and then, as Thomas said, some of the proposed approaches that we are thinking of. So just in terms of the actual background, currently only licensed assistance dogs are allowed to travel on Metro. We do informally have dogs travelling on the Black Cat ferry at the moment. What else am I going to say? Oh, the public consultation happened through the Regional Public Transport Plan at the end of last year, so September to October. We provided an officers' hearings report to the Regional Transport Committee and the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee ahead of their deliberations, which happened in March of this year. So just a note as well that all of the details and all of the analysis that we did as a result of the Regional Public Transport Plan consultation is available on the website through the hearings officers' report publicly. Currently, we're expecting the Regional Public Transport Plan to be adopted in July of 2025. So this is the current draft policy as it stands in the current draft Regional Public Transport Plan. So the policy currently states that passengers are permitted to travel with pets on public transport with appropriate controls in place as identified in the Metro Code of Conduct. There were no significant changes to the draft policy as a result of the consultation. The purpose of keeping the policy at a really high level is to allow the Code of Conduct to carry the operational conditions. That allows us to be really flexible in terms of responding to any customer feedback, and that Code of Conduct can be changed at any time. It's really flexible. The couple of changes that were made as a result of the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee deliberations were under the actions heading, so that we did agree to monitor the number of pets being carried, and we do that through a button on the dash in a very similar way as we currently monitor bikes and Super Gold concessions, for example. And we just note that none of the other regions where there's a similar policy in place currently monitor the number of pets being carried. We also agreed that we would undertake regular reviews of the controls under the Code of Conduct. And that would be reflected in the Communications and Engagement Plan. So with regards to early engagement, we worked as we usually do with our accessibility reference group and the public transport stakeholder reference group, and we did a couple of in-depth workshops with them. The purpose of that early engagement was really to understand the kind of support that we might expect to see in Canterbury with our community, and to really get a sense of who might benefit from the policy. We wanted to check our understanding of community concerns and to discuss the appropriate conditions. We also really wanted to get the views of drivers and operators. We work with Kinetic and Ritchie's, and obviously in other areas they have experience also implementing this policy in other regions, so we were really keen to understand how that had gone for them. And we also wanted to understand clearly the experience of other councils where this was similar policies were in place. And we got a lot of really good information from the other councils. They were really supportive, and we got all of their research and information, and we were able to get a sense of how things unfolded in their communities. So this is what we learned. At the top level, these are the types of concerns that we heard from the community. We understood from this, in talking to people, that the level of support for a pets on public transport policy was really dependent on a discussion about the appropriate conditions. We did understand that this topic is really polarising as well. That came through quite loud and clear through the early engagement. The discussion of conditions included things like the obvious, which is the carriers and dogs on a leash with a muzzle. We also talked about things like time of day, so peak versus non-peak hours, the potential for size restrictions, minimum age of the individual accompanying a pet, number of pets per individual and number of pets on the bus itself, and whether or not pets would occupy a seat. And there were some other things as well, like concerns from the disability community about various priorities and what the impact might be on a disability assist dog. So this is what we learned. Through our reference groups, they were clear that there was a level of support in principle as an enabler of equitable access to the public transport network, and very much supportive of a cautious approach, at minimum pets in a carrier at off-peak times. One of the foundational pieces of feedback that we received was from operators, and they said to us that the code of conduct and the conditions needed to be as unambiguous as possible, both to mitigate any driver impact and also to reduce the potential for any passenger conflict. And that was something that really informed our approach as we moved forward. So we understand really clearly that driver support is key to implementing a policy like this successfully. One of the pieces of feedback that we got from other councils was that customer feedback during their times of implementation generally was not about health and safety. It was about operational concerns like drivers denying boarding to passengers who are turning up with pets, and that just led to quite a negative experience for those passengers. And we understand that we want people who turn up to travel with a pet to understand that they can do that with confidence and effectively plan their journey. So other regions did undertake their trials in the public sphere. And we were able to have a look at their social media verbatim responses, which really did confirm that the concerns from our community were very similar to those expressed by other communities before implementation. And we just noted that Wellington and Dunedin have retained the initial conditions of carrier only, and the other three regions have moved on after the initial phase to allow dogs leashed and muzzled on their networks. So this early engagement really did inform our public consultation methodology, and we decided to test two scenarios in line with the other council's approach. One was more restrictive with pets in a carrier at off-peak times, and the other was slightly less restricted with dogs leashed and muzzled. And so this is what we heard. The questionnaire itself had a number of questions that were choice-based or rating-based, and after each question we asked people to give us additional detail of why they responded the way that they did, and as a result we have a really rich database of feedback from the community, and we got a real sense of why they were applying in the way that they did. We did a sentiment analysis, so we looked at across the board people's responses to all the different questions, and we identified whether they were positive, negative, neutral, or in some cases unclear. So as you can see here, there's 60% of people were positive about the proposal, 28% were negative, 10% were unsure, and there was a couple of percent who were unclear. We note that some people said that they would not be interested in travelling with pets. We really wanted to understand whether people would or would not, in fact, actually take advantage of the policy. So 53% stated they wouldn't be interested, and more than a third were pet owners. Some of the reasons that they gave for that is that their pet might be too anxious or unruly. Obviously, a lot of people didn't actually have pets, so it was not applicable. And then other people said things like their pet wouldn't fit in a carrier, that the carrier was inconvenient, and a bit too heavy to carry, and particularly not convenient if you're, taking a dog out or a pet out for recreation and you had to carry a carrier at the other end. They also cited all the other kinds of things that we heard earlier around allergies and safety. One change that did arise in terms of what we heard from people is that we had initially said that we had proposed one pet per passenger, and we heard from a lot of people that, sometimes people have smaller pets. They might have a couple of kittens or guinea pigs or something, and it didn't make sense to have two carriers for that. So we think we'd be able to accommodate that in the Code of Conduct. And we really wanted to understand what the potential impact on patronage might be. So we asked people to tell us whether they would be more or less likely to travel on Metro if pets were able to travel on public transport. And this is where we can really see that polarisation. So there's a large group in the middle of 44% who said there'd be no change. There's actually 5% who said they were unsure. So there's almost half of the people who said no change or unsure. And then there's those outliers. 26% said that they would be less likely to travel and 25% more likely. So this is just a range of responses that we heard from people in response to the question about whether they or somebody in their family or a friend might be interested in travelling on the network with a pet. And it's just a good thing to be able to look at people's responses verbatim and get a real sense of why or why not they might support the proposal. We just note the opposing views here and the need for real robust communication and if we move forward with the policy. So we did a full risk analysis, and we've predicated this risk analysis on the basis of our initial proposal, which is to have pets in a carrier at off-peak times with one carrier per passenger. Carriers really do mitigate a wide range of the concerns, and they help reduce the level of driver discretion that's needed, again, reducing the potential for passenger conflict. And again, that was something that we really used that operator feedback to inform our approach. We understand that this really doesn't meet the needs of some people. It's really clear through the feedback that we received that people who have pets that don't fit in a carrier, so those medium or large dogs, it doesn't meet their needs to begin with. The advice originally was to proceed cautiously, really to allay any concerns and start to build that public confidence. One of the things that we understand from other councils is that the uptake and the use of the policy has been relatively minimal. We don't have any reason to expect that will be different in Canterbury, but we just don't know. And there are also as we said earlier, there's over 500 drivers in the network, and so bearing in mind that there's been some concerns on their part, we proposed an initially cautious approach using just this restrictive conditions with a carrier. And that's just in line with other regions as well, where implementation took place with pets and carriers to begin with. And then, as we said, later on, 3 of them opened up to dogs that were leashed and muzzled. So these are the initial conditions that we're proposing for the Metro Code of Conduct with pets in an enclosed carrier. This is not how we anticipate the Code of Conduct will be framed, and we would like to finalise those specific conditions with our operators just to make sure that we are allowing for all the different conditions across the different services that we run. But these are the sort of top level conditions that we're looking at. So in terms of the next steps, again, subject to council adoption of the policy, we're looking at pre-launch activities, and we've just started the pre-launch work with the operators. We need to finalise the Code of Conduct, and and we need to do some driver training. That's really clear. So the run-up that we need in order to complete the driver training is dependent on the method that we agree with the operators, and there's a couple of different options. We'll have to implement a monitoring plan and a public communications campaign, and we would expect to come back to council with a review based on the first 12 months of operation, and then we would have another look at the code of conduct and the controls. At this point, we think tentatively August or September, again, depending on conversations with the operators in terms of a potential launch date, subject to that adoption of the RPTP. So that's where we're at the moment, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Kia ora, thank you. Can you just remind me of what the other regions have done? So you mentioned that Wellington and Otago, I'm assuming Dunedin, they've retained carriers after starting with carriers. They've retained that. What are the other regions that have moved on to? And can you tell us their controls?
Yes. So Connect, which is Horizons Regional Council, Nelson, and what did we not count? Yeah, Auckland Transport. The controls, so AT, Connect and Nelson have moved on to allowing pets, dogs that are leashed and muzzled. Nelson, I think they're just in the final phases of their trial with leashed and muzzled dogs. They wanted to take it through a summer season to see if it made any difference to the uptake of the policy. They all require pets to travel at off-peak times. There are additional conditions like pets are the responsibility of their owners, and you need to be able to get the pet on and off the bus on your own. If I just go back to the key conditions. So those are the key conditions that are pretty much in line with everybody else, and I have some additional.
And they have a size limit too, Stephanie. Is there a size limit?
No, there's no size limit. That was quite difficult to operationalise. So where there are dogs able to go on the bus, no size limit.
Yeah, cool. And are the only other three that have done something different than carriers?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Dion, and then I'll come around the room. Yeah.
Thank you for the analysis. It's evident that there's been a considerable amount of analysis done on this work, and which is great. And I really appreciate that. So thank you. It's out of the analysis has come a relatively conservative position, which is fine. That's what the evidence is pointing to, potentially. But I think the analysis from my reading of it, from a political perspective, is looking at this conservative approach due to the concerns of the drivers. Is because if I'm looking at the analysis from the public, the wider public, we would be a little bit less conservative potentially. So, what are the specific issues with the drivers? Because that is a big concern for me. And is there anything that we can do more to get a better understanding so that, if we do go down a less conservative approach, that we're not putting the drivers out, because they're probably the most important piece to this.
I think that it's not just the issues with the driver. I think importantly, one of the things that we do understand is that it's so polarised, and what we do hear from the community is that more than a quarter of people didn't support the proposal. And although there are a lot of people who do support it, there's enough of a large contingent of people who are really unsupportive, and we really heard the concerns from people in the deliberations. That's a group of people, particularly the ones who said that they would be less likely to travel on metro, that we were just concerned that there's a large enough group of people that have concerns that a cautious approach would help to build some public trust. In terms of the drivers, it's drivers and operators. It's the impact on the driver of having to use their discretion each time somebody comes on board. So if you've got a dog on a lead, they would have to have a muzzle as well. If there's a size restriction, for example, there, as I said, there's no size restrictions in other councils. It's quite difficult to operationally decide at the point of entry how big a dog is, for example. But that's not an issue in the network in other places. Some people do have concerns about the size of the dog. People are really concerned about coming into contact with a large dog, but we don't know that that's necessarily going to be an issue. The risks really are around driver discretion having to be utilised, and that leading potentially to an inconsistent implementation of the policy. One of the things that we do understand that's really important is for those people that really do need it, they need to have confidence that they're going to be able to show up to the bus stop with a pet and get on the bus per the policy. And we know that from other councils that there's potentially some inconsistency there.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a couple of other questions I'm going to ask, but I'll pass.
Oh, good. Thanks, Dion. I've got Greg. Did you have a question as well? I'll go to Greg. I'll go along there, and then we'll come to Nick and Nick. Yeah.
Hey, thanks very much. I'm not sure if you're aware, around about 2018, Department of Conservation brought in a colour-coded leash collar scheme, which red, green, and it was basically so that people going onto the dock estate could easily go, oh, there's a dog coming towards me, and it's a green, which means it's generally friendly, whatever it may be, through to a red where it might be a dog prefers to be by itself. There is a requirement around some sort of training or whatever. I mean, if your dog goes to some sort of training or whatever, you get a green or whatever. I'm wondering if that has a place within this on the bus, at least to promote a scheme like that, because there are a number of them actually operate out there, which kind of gives a heads up to a driver. It gives a heads up to anyone else on the bus, gives a heads up to anyone else who may bring a dog onto the bus. And I think it's not the panacea for any of those issues, because I'm not actually a dog person. I mean, I like them. I think I like them, but I've never really had a relationship with a dog in the home, if you know what I mean. Although I did live in a clubhouse that had two, but that's a different story. So that might be something to have a brief explore at. It's really easy, to maybe add to a report that comes and says there is some value to that, along with, and I must admit, really happy to hear about driver training, because ultimately we already know that the conflict that occurs from time to time on buses through humans is hard enough to manage at times. So thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Grant?
Thanks for that. Just regarding the deliberations process in the hearings committee, we didn't get a deliberations report or a report on the findings or changes that were being mooted by the hearings committee, and I can't remember whether there was a change recommended about pets on buses, but is that report, could the panel receive that report, or has it been written? A number of changes were made to the actual document, and it would be good to just see them in a
Yes, I believe that those changes were incorporated. I'm not quite sure where that's at in terms of the RPTP process, but we can look into that. I'm sure there's a time that those changes will be being presented. I'll get some more detail.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Sonia.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So essentially, the last report that went to is going through GCP and RTC. The version of the document, the draft document, contains the changes, and the ones that were through the deliberations process and the hearings is in a different colour. So it's already included within the draft RPTP. So it's visible there.
It's just a good point, because, obviously GCP did their ones on a different day to the RTC, and they had different feedback. So, yeah, I don't think we've had a follow-up to that to find out I obviously spoke to Grant and understood what happened, but I haven't actually seen it all come back together. So is there a process for that? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going through the RTC committee with that draft report with the changes in there, so incorporating all the changes.
The next RTC meeting?
Yes, and the next GCPC meeting.
Oh, next GCP?
Yeah.
Both, or? Sorry.
So both, yes.
Right,
So it's
cool.
two separate reports
Thank
going to both committees.
Thank you.
Yep.
Cheers.
Is it appropriate to have those changes and those things sent directly to the panel members? Is that something that we should have done?
So sorry, the first resolution on the paper is for the hearing panels to confirm the minutes. So the minutes are also included as part of the report as well. So the changes are within the minutes. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Sonia. Genevieve?
Oh, thanks for that. Just carrying on for Greg's points, I was going to refer to the same sort of concept. I guess regulation of appropriate, like muzzle, collar, lead system. I mean, probably just puts a wee bit too much freedom on being able to put anything on your dog and call it a lead or whatever. That's just concept. But you know how, like in some cities, you can still buy a rubbish bag and it's council, it comes with a fee, that type of thing. It would be good if something like that in lieu of ticketing or similar, because I'm thinking large dogs, if we can't restrict, St. Bernard comes on and it might restrict 2 passengers from entry. So I guess there needs to be some sort of restriction on something without being a restriction.
I mean, the proposal at the moment from staff, the recommendation is to have carriers. That's the current control. So if it's about a different state, then so that's what you're saying. If it was not that, how would we deal with it? Yeah, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Probably going a bit off track, but yeah. Following on from Greg, good ideas, Greg. Yeah.
I mean, I get that the size thing is really difficult for a driver who's sitting in the seat going, is that under 50 centimetres or under a metre? That I get that. So I think that's what you're alluding to as well, Genevieve. Like, how do you manage that as well? So yeah, is it?
We might be wise to add something maybe for future.
Yeah. We'll get to it. Yeah.
Well, how do lifeguards monitor a child going onto a slide?
Often they have like a size thing on the wall.
Right.
Yeah. that could be easy to do at a pool, but not as easy in a bus, I would imagine. But anyway, Vicky.
Just to the point about having some sort of managing dogs of different sizes, like the solution might be worth looking at when we got to that stage might be through essentially having your dog connected to your card, to your to some sort of card, so it's gone through an approval process, and it's like having a concession. And actually, some of the dogs that are more concerning are actually the smaller size but very solid dogs. In terms of the carriers, so I actually watched the Penguin Lessons at the weekend, which is a good fun film, and that's got a guy carrying a penguin in a carrier bag. When you're talking about carriers here, you're saying closed, so it's like fully zipped in. Having had a quick look, there are soft carriers. So, because my little entrepreneurial brain was thinking, soft carriers, because you wouldn't want to carry a solid cage around, but it looks like that has been already, and it's been Bunnings. So would that be suitable? We're not saying they have to be a particular rigidity or anything. These are soft bags that can put your pet in, pops open like a pop-up tent or something, and then flat packs, and you can carry it on your shoulder when your dog walks. Is that what we're talking about here? Sorry.
We haven't looked at specific carriers, but if you go onto the MetLink site, you can see that they've got a couple of different options that they're suggesting are appropriate carriers. And I think we're looking at it, one of them is a soft carrier. Yeah.
Thank you. Going to come to Nook, and then I've got Claire. I've seen your hand. Sorry, Claire, but we'll get there. Thank you. Where you go, Nick?
As an owner of several farm dogs, used to be, I've got a few reservations, I guess. I have seen a very, very friendly dog in a space that he wasn't used to, doing something that he shouldn't have done. But anyway, it's just a comment. You talk about driver training. How many drivers are you going to train for this initial, and what sort of cost?
We've got different mechanisms for training the drivers. So there's an online portal that the operators have available to us. So we need to train all of the drivers. Every driver needs to have the same information. And so the methodology that we use will just depend on what kind of access we can have as well. So we do some face-to-face training at the moment. We wouldn't be able to get through 500 drivers face-to-face, so we'll have to use a combination of methodologies and use some of the internal mechanisms that the operators have available.
Yep. Nope. You're good? Cool. Any other questions or feedback from... Oh, sorry. Wait, sorry.
So just to add to Steph's comment, it is, in terms of the implementation proposal, we've included a coming back to council after 12 months, and that is, these concepts of different validation and such is really important for that. But also, on the driver training, just practically speaking, there's a lot that drivers need to know, and in yesterday's monthly update, we talked about some customer experience challenges, for example. So there's always a lot we need to cover, and only limited capacity with drivers. So that's part of the thinking why the initial proposal was relatively black and white, and to do something more nuanced would require considerable training to do it well. So that's part of the thinking behind having, I guess, this journey of an initial launch and then revisiting after 12 months.
Cool, thank you. Claire.
Yeah, thanks. I think all my questions have really been answered. I think I'm supportive of the policy as it's drafted with the cautious approach. I've been a lifelong dog owner until the last 6 years, as is my family. Also been a victim of a dog bite when I was young. I know that young children are scared of. I support a cautious approach and a revisit. I do think that we do need to be very aware, and I'm pleased to hear the staff are very cognizant of the drivers' some reticence at this stage. So, yeah, I just think that we as a council table need to be aware of that. So I would support the policies that's currently drafted with the cautious approach. Yeah, I think the dog issue we need to do a lot more thinking about. Well, dogs on leashes and muzzles, I think we need to do a lot more thinking about. So just a general comment after my questions have been answered.
Thanks, Claire. Ian?
Look, I'm sorry I've come into this discussion late, but I just can't help but think that requiring dogs to travel in an enclosed carrier is basically saying we support the policy of having dogs on buses, but we're going to make it practically impossible for you to do it. So I just wonder whether there's an alternative way of enabling it, whether you register the owner and only people who, passed a certain test or something are allowed to take dogs on. But if you... The submission we had from the chappie from, I think he was Littleton or over that side somewhere, was really to align us with other jurisdictions where they do enable, urbanised dogs, which are different to... I wouldn't even dream of taking any of my dogs anywhere near a bus, but I'm not really sure I'd let my children on a bus. But I just can't help but think we're sort of saying yes but no at the same time, which seems counterintuitive.
Ian, earlier in the thing, and acknowledge that what you said at the start. So, of the 5 regions that currently have pets on buses policies, so you've got Wellington and Otago that so all of them started with a carrier option. So that's what happened. Wellington and Otago have retained carriers, so they've retained that policy. Horizons, Nelson and Auckland have moved on to leashed and muzzled. So just so you know, so there's a bit of a mix across the country, but all of them started with a cautious approach. Yeah.
If I remember the submission from the chappie who was ex-military, I think correctly, he was actually talking about overseas.
Yeah, and overseas. Overseas is different, but that just gives you some context about how it's done in New Zealand. So there's those 5 different regions and how they've done it so far. Yeah, where you go, Stephanie?
I was just going to say, for the people that responded, it's not just about people transporting dogs as well. So there's quite a large contingent of people with cats, for example, and the carrier is sort of the appropriate thing for the cat or some of the other smaller pets that need to get to the vet, in addition to dogs, which are, the key ones that I guess we're talking about most frequently.
I thought it was quite helpful what Claire said, just in terms of where people are at with the policy. It might just be useful at this stage, if we had a bit of time left, if people are sort of, not that you have to put all your cards on the table, just tell us if you're roughly supportive of the current restriction, or you'd like to see that be something different. I think that would be useful. Genevieve?
I just think that's inappropriate with the process through RTC and GCP to commence or to continue. And also a live workshop, I don't think we should be indicating that right now. There's still more information to play out. And it's quite interesting you're taking this position, Chair.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's already, we've got something in front of us. I think it's good for staff to have an idea of the feedback that we might have. But I'm happy if people don't want to do that too, that's fine. Greg?
Genevieve was first, but I was just going to follow up on that. Not that we're straw polling it, but I guess this is all about developing what's going to come to us. So I actually support the fact that we need to, think about, and if we're giving staff not direction, but we're sort of putting our two bobs worth, and at least we don't end up with something coming to the table which is completely, an apple and an orange, and we're all going, but we wanted a banana, So yeah.
Yeah, and like with the processes that have gone on so far, Joe, you know that it's been to the GCP, it's been to the RTC. They've supported the current policy and the staff advice. So that's where we're at. But ultimately, as you know, it comes back to this council to make a decision. So I'm interested in where people sit. So unless people are allergic to it, then I want to know that as well. So, Genevieve?
I actually am broadly happy with the cage system. I mean, I've seen Dunedin has done it pretty well too. The only other thing is I've seen that others have also implemented a pet bus where certain routes at certain times might mean that people who are really comfortable with animals can all jump on and do certain things. So, like, how you have certain buses that kneel, some don't. This one could be a pet-friendly bus that you are less restricted and more happy to take as an option. Just putting it there. Yeah, sawdust on the floor.
I mean, because without doing what I said before, I mean, if I was to summarise what I've heard from people today, most people seem like they're pretty supportive of where we're at. There's some people that obviously have said questions about if we went to muzzling and leashed, how could you do that? I've heard that from this side of the table. So there's obviously some willingness to look at that space, but other than that, it's hard to predict where we're at. So that would be my summary of what I've heard around the table, unless there's anyone else who wishes to speak. Yep, there you go, Sonia.
Sorry, I think it's just worth noting at this point, the draft policy that's coming through the RPTP will be the policy that we're looking for approval for. It doesn't include the code of conduct conditions, so that's not, we're getting feedback today around that, but essentially that's an operational decision, so that's not included as part of the RPTP policy.
Yeah. Get that, and it's a tricky space for us because the policy is actually pretty well worded, and it's easy to support because it's got appropriate controls. But what those appropriate controls are important to us, because of course that's where the community interface is, and that's the feedback we're going to get as elected members. So I think there's a bit of working together on that and understanding where the comfortableness in the room is around those controls. But it's been laid out well here in terms of why the recommendation is to have the certain controls that you've proposed. So, just trying to be fair to what the concerns are, what we hear from our community, and what we're feeding back. So, is there anyone else who wishes to? Yeah, I had Grant before. Do you still want to say something, Grant?
Oh, just to say I'm fairly neutral at the moment, being chair of the GCP, and noting that we haven't yet seen the final changes that were mooted by GCP, but that will come, and obviously there's going to be discussion on that. So for me, it's obviously as a hearings panel member, the policy changes that were made within it were all, largely okay. But there were some other things that needed changing. What just reminded me before, one thing that the panel did ask was there didn't seem to be any data from the other PTAs about the numbers of dogs that went on buses. And I think we sort of queried that, and I don't know whether staff have gone back and checked that out. You have?
Yeah, there's no data being collected by any of the other councils, and really the feedback that we got from them is that honestly the policy is used. There are relatively few people taking advantage of the policy of travelling with pets on public transport. From their perspective, it hasn't made a huge difference on their network, and we wouldn't necessarily anticipate anything different here. It's just that you don't know until you implement the policy. And just for clarity, this is the wording of the current policy as it stands in the current draft RPTP, and the couple of small changes that we made are just under those actions header, where after the deliberations we agreed to monitor the number of pets and to undertake regular reviews.
Cool. Greg, did you have any? Sorry. Yeah. John?
Thank you. And equally, I'm kind of neutral, but I sort of wonder about the efficacy of putting small animals in a cage just to get started, and wonder why muzzled and leashed dogs don't. we don't allow that. But equally, I walked out of a fine dining establishment just the other day. A couple walked past with a small dog, and there was a large dog in the back of a ute, fortunately chained on, scared the bejesus out. I mean, bloody near dropped my pie. So I didn't see either of them until all went off. So yeah, I really do kind of recognise the challenge of reactions of dogs and people and things, and when you're just totally wandering out thinking this is a very good pie, and then all hell lets loose, and you go, what the hell's going on here? So yeah, I do recognise the challenges.
Cool. Dion?
Could I just say to that I wouldn't like that dog's chances fighting you over pie, John.
Oh, he did look nasty when I saw him. He was agitated.
Dion?
Speechless. Speechless. Sorry. That was really... This policy, the way that we're approaching this conform with how other PTAs have done it through a policy and then a operational code of conduct? Because what I'm in the back of my mind is that once we do this policy, then what's the input that elected members can have from their communities in shaping the code of conduct to reflect what we're hearing and what we want as elected members?
So in terms of content for a regional public transport plan, that's going to a lower level than that would be unusual. It gets highly detailed, and there's the RPTP is a significant major piece which sets our path. So in terms of the journey beyond here, to talk a bit more about the review after 12 months, I think that's important to give some more detail on. So we'll have data on patronage. So we'll have a process in place for drivers to give that. We expect there'll be some initial interest. So but after 12 months, you'll have all the seasons where we'll have some variation, and I guess we'll get more of a indication of what the likely usage is. We'll also have our customer feedback over that period. So probably will generate some complaints, maybe some compliments of feedback. Because most customers won't be on a bus where there's a pet. We need some time to get that information. So all that information, as well as sort of re-engagement with our reference groups, that will come back to you as part of that. So we won't just be making changes to the code of conduct without council, without coming back to council.
So So you're saying there'll be a feedback mechanism on code of conduct changes in 12 months? So council will get a chance to give feedback, but obviously don't get to make a decision because it's in the code of conduct. Yeah. Is that correct? Okay.
So that's the interesting part that I find about this, about the process. I'd say personally, I don't have any issue with the draft policy as it's written here. I actually think that's quite fine. As a personal view, I think we can be a little bit more less conservative on the approach outside of the peak times. I think I agree with the peak time thing, but I think we could potentially be a little bit more or less conservative. That's just my personal view. So, given what I've read and seen everything, but I do have a slight concern about, because this has come from a political interest, about how we keep that political interest and oversight from us at whatever way it ends up going. So that was the only piece of thing that I've got in the back of my mind and feedback for that. So thank you.
And it is tricky, and that's why I think feedback on the code of conduct conditions is important from council because of what Dion's just said. Joe, did you want to make a comment on this? Okay, thank you. Thanks, staff. Thanks so much. And just to be clear, so we've got the process